Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second webinar with the Wyoming County Chamber of Commerce. This morning, we are launching a new series, and we have heard from many of you that you still have questions. Questions about the Paycheck Protection Program, questions about the economic recovery programs, and how can we help you? So I solicited some questions and got great response, so I thank you for that. And this morning I have on the call with me Keith Yurgowski from the Small Business Development Center. He is a business consultant. We have Neil King, a commercial banking officer with Community Bank, and Alex Halper, the Director of Government Affairs with the PA Chamber. So they are going to answer our questions today about PPP and the EIDL programs. But first I want to go over a little bit about what this series will look like. So we have launched what we are calling Restart, Rebound, Rebuild. It's a business development series from the Wyoming County Chamber, and each week we will host experts to answer your outstanding questions about how to maximize the government resources and programs available to open your business, or to reopen your business. And we understand the need for urgency in communicating in a timely manner to you, so we are prepared to offer webinars as many times as 3 times a week. Each webinar will be about a half hour, and we'll discuss your questions with the experts, and then we'll give you the opportunity to ask additional questions. We ask that you put those questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat box. You could just enter that and then enter your questions. And we will record these webinars, and they will be posted to our YouTube channel and available for you to share with other business partners, and also available on our social media and website. I want to thank Matt Schaefer, who is a board member with the Wyoming County Chamber, for helping us to vision this out, how it'll look. And I want to take a little bit of time this morning to just explain that. So the restart portion of this webinar series will focus on what you need to think about right now before your business reopens. Again, today we're going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. We have a webinar coming up with HR specialists to talk about unemployment and the Families First Corona Care Act, also the sick leave. And then we will have a webinar with an accountant to talk about employee retention tax credits and other credits available to you. Next, our Rebound series will focus on the successful startup. How do we come out of this pause in our business community? So what does a successful startup look like? Who should be coming back into the office? Who should still be working from home? Compensation changes that you may want to consider, retirement contributions. We'll also be talking about what does filing for forgiveness look like with your PPP loans, lines of credit, cash reserves. We'll talk to you about marketing. We'll bring in a marketing specialist to talk to you about how to reach and reassure your customers. And then also the labor laws that may change around mobile workforce and what that means to you as an employer. And finally, Rebuild. Rebuild will focus on adapting to these changes and what our new normal will look like in the workplace. What changes do you need to make in your workplace post-COVID? I've already spoke to restaurant owners who are looking at bringing in placemats, things they've never done before, but disposable placemats, spreading out or having less tables in their restaurant. For the chamber, does it look like more consistent online programming? People seem to really, take part in these video conferences, so perhaps this is something that we do going forward more consistently. And then again, we'll talk about your financing as you get started. What does your online services you offer look like? And are you getting the best deal for online merchant services and your credit card companies and so on? So again, we're open to suggestions on this. If you think of something or you have questions or you want to hear from an expert, please let us know. This series is being built as we go, and we're excited to bring it to you. Again, Matt Schaefer was very instrumental in getting this off the ground, so I want to be sure to thank him and Allison for thinking this through and figuring out how we can get it started and rolling with all of you. So again, I have about 10 questions on each of the two programs. We're going to first talk about the Paycheck Protection Program. So we have Neil King on the phone with us. He's from Community Bank. And first, just to get started, Neil, if a business owner has not applied for PPP yet, what documentation will the bank be looking for from them?
Sure. The best thing to do is to contact your local bank and ask them what they're looking for. But in general, you'll need to have a fully completed SBA PPP app, signed and initialed appropriately. A spreadsheet of some sort showing how you came up with your calculation of your average monthly payroll, and all supporting documentation. For wages, the best form is the IRS Form 940, which is the preferred, or all 4 quarters of your IRS Form 941. Your business documents, such as an operating agreement or articles of incorporation, are helpful. A copy of the front and back of your driver's license, your email address to make sure, because much of the documentation is taking place via email, so make sure we have the correct email address for you. And with regards to health insurance or retirement funds, it's key to make sure that you isolate only what was paid by you as an employer, not what was contributed by your employees. So it would include any documentation, health insurance premium, bills, QuickBooks reports, showing the compilation of those costs that you may be including in your numbers. So that's the basics of what a bank would be looking for.
Great, thank you. So our next question about the amount of forgiveness of the PPP loan. We know it depends on the borrower's overall payroll cost for the 8-week period, but when does that 8-week period begin?
From what we've read and been told, the 8-week period starts the day that you receive the PPP funds.
Very good. Now, once approved for the PPP loan, can I ask my bank to hold off on depositing those funds because I may not be ready to bring my employees back?
The SBA has given guidance that once approved and documented, that we are to fund the loan proceeds at that time and not delay.
Okay. How much of my loan will be forgiven?
That's a pretty broad question. Some of it will depend on how the funds are spent and whether you can document how the funds were spent for qualifying uses. So the maximum that can be used for non-payroll for things such as qualifying rent or utilities, mortgage interest, is 25% of the total proceeds.
Great. So generally speaking, if we spend 75% of our PPP loan on payroll and the other 25% on those qualified costs, the entire PPP loan could be forgiven.
In general, yes.
And okay, so our next question. Do I need to bring my employees back on my payroll immediately upon receiving those PPP funds?
The SBA guidance seems to indicate that the clock starts the day you receive the funds. So if there's any delay in bringing back staff, that has a high probability that it will reduce your potential forgiveness amount.
All right, very good. And Alex, I think this question is more for you. So is the PA unemployment compensation expense an allowable cost under PPP?
Well, I believe the SBA guidance provides that state and local taxes may be considered as part of payroll costs. Now, I would note that the state legislature has passed a number of changes to unemployment compensation law, including providing automatic relief from charges for employers if you have an employee who qualifies for unemployment benefits based on a COVID-19 related reason. So typically, if you have an employee qualify for unemployment benefits, that will be reflected in your experience rating and could increase your UC taxes. That is not supposed to happen. In this case, you should automatically be relieved of those charges. But in terms of eligibility for the PPP loans, I do believe that state and local taxes are that loan proceeds can be used for those purposes.
And Neil, that's that's all a part of the calculation then, correct?
All that I've seen so far, just personally, is unemployment compensation. So I defer to Alex's response for the remainder. Great.
So again, Neil, back to you. How long does it take to receive the PPP funds once I have been approved, once the loan has been approved?
Sure. It'll depend on your particular bank, how many applications are in process and awaiting loan documentation. Once they're approved internally by the bank, banks have to submit them through an SBA website for an SBA loan number, and then they have to wait to be documented. So typically I would say it would be a matter of weeks probably before you receive the funds.
Okay. And then Alex, I think this question you may be able to speak more to this as well. So if I bring my employees back for the 8 weeks under PPP and the governor's order still remains to keep my business closed, can my employees go back on unemployment, and will that affect my PPP loan forgiveness? So there's really two questions there.
And they're good questions. I don't believe that the SBA or lenders are inquiring about what employers intend to do with their workforce following the completion of the loan. So once once the employer has worked with their lender on the kind of final forgiveness piece of the loan. I think it's at the employer's discretion on how to handle employees at that point, and if it seems necessary to lay off or furlough those employees, then I've not seen anything that doing so would sort of retroactively jeopardize your eligibility for forgiveness under PPP.
Great. And then Neil, if I have money remaining in my PPP loan that cannot be used for eligible costs, what should I do?
I believe that if the funds are still held by the recipient, that you could either reduce the loan amount, once you find out how much you were forgiven, and if there's still money that was unused, you could either use it for the monthly payments for the unforgiven portion of it, or reduce the amount lump sum. However, there does need to be notification, as is typical, I believe, with SBA type loans. If you reduce the loan by more than, I believe it's 20% in any given time.
Okay. Neil, if I am self-employed and have one other seasonal employee, do I need to bring back that seasonal employee to work in order to qualify for PPP?
I believe that it depends on when the seasonal employee normally works. So if the seasonal employee does not normally work, let's say April, May, June timeframe, so a lot of it's going to depend on what kind of seasonal business it is. But if they don't normally work during that period, then I don't think that it's something where you have to bring them back, because you would not normally be paying them anyway during this time frame. Otherwise, for seasonal employees, you have to show, to my knowledge, the same period in the prior year, what occurred on a historical basis in that period, and then you're essentially trying to replicate that in the current year. Alex or anyone have any additional information on that?
Don't.
No.
No, just that I've seen there is a calculation for seasonal employees, and they can look at it in a couple different ways. So I think that is on the sheet, the sample sheet of the PPP, and I'll send that out when we send this recording. There's a good explanation of that that I have. Neil, who determines the PPP forgiveness? Is that the bank, or does that paperwork go back to SBA and they determine the forgiveness?
My understanding is that the bank does the calculation for forgiveness based on strictly following the SBA guidelines. We have to show and have documentation to back up the decision that is made. So this, like any other of the answers, it's kind of general guidance and not specific answers to your specific situation. So it's always important to go back to your particular bank in each of these respects and have a discussion with them.
Great. And Alex, I think this is the last question that we have under PPP right now. What if an employee or employees quit while I have them furloughed, but I have counted them in my PPP calculation? Will this be held against me for the loan forgiveness?
From everything I've seen, I think it will be. The purpose of PPP, or really what they're focusing on is encouraging employers to maintain payroll and to maintain that FTE count. And if that declines, then that, I do believe, will be counted against the amount of the loan that is forgivable. If someone, obviously in Pennsylvania, we're seeing this just incredible surge in unemployment compensation claims, and despite the fact that the Department of Labor and Industry has said that if you have work available, if your business is open, then you are not eligible for unemployment benefits. We have seen that in practice, folks are generally being found eligible, but employers have an opportunity, as difficult as it might be, have an opportunity to contest those claims if work is available, if you're attempting to bring a furloughed employee back. And obviously the stakes are even higher with this PPP program if you need to maintain that FTE count. So as difficult as it might be to do that, employers are going to need to contest claims. If that particular individual refuses to come back to work, I think you have to hire someone else. It's not person specific, it's FTE, but they are looking at employers to maintain those numbers.
And again, it's a percentage of payroll and your FTEs as well. So that calculation was on a website that I looked at yesterday, and I'll see if I can pull that off and post that too, so that if people do have specific questions, if one or two of my full-time FTEs leave, what does that look like for my overall calculation? I think that information is all out there and available. Well, I thank you, Neil and Alex, for your help so far with this call. And we're going to move on to Keith and talk a little bit about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So Keith, a lot has changed in this program in the recent weeks. And since we last talked and had you on our call, probably the biggest thing is the $10,000 emergency assistance portion of the EIDL program. So why don't we start there?
Okay, the $10,000 advance is, a lot of people didn't, it's up to $10,000 advance, and it's based on your employees. So it's $1,000 per employee, capped at $10,000. So, a lot of people think that they applied for a $10,000 grant when realistically the average advance is probably about $6,000.
Right. So, and again, that was in the original legislation, but the application may have not made that 100% clear. So that was where that confusion came in. If you have applied for that EIDL grant, you should have received an email yesterday to explain that, from SBA that explained that $10,000 emergency assistance, or up to $10,000 emergency assistance.
Correct.
Keith, the number two question I guess we get is, how can I track my EIDL application status?
There's really no way to track it. There is SBA has an email that you can email to ask questions, and go here. That email is disastercustomerservice@sba.gov. But from what I understand, the mass volume of emails they're receiving, it's taken a long time to get a response on that. And if you do, it's probably going to be something canned. But everything is through SBA, so you're going to have to go through that email. That's the only one we've been told to track your, applications. The other issue that has come up that I've seen too is that there is, and people need to be concerned with this, is, originally they were saying that the site had crashed a few times, and people were putting in, trying to apply more than once. And from what I understand, that was every time they were applying, it was, a credit check was being run. So the multiple credit checks could actually lower your credit score.
So what should they do about that? Should they,
I have a feeling that there's going to have to be some sort of it's going to be something that they're going to have to deal with the credit bureaus to try to get that fixed. Maybe some sort of letter written or an explanation, but there hasn't been any clarification put out on that yet.
Okay. Very good. Now, how will I be notified if my loan has been approved through EIDL?
When you submitted your EIDL application, you received a screen with a confirmation number on it, and also it said this email that you provided will be the way that they contact you. So you'll receive it through that email.
And then once I receive approval, what do I need to do next?
Nothing. I mean, whatever. At that point, you'll usually the EIDL loans, and this is the part that people need to understand. The SBA processes about 1,000 loan applications a year, and they disperse about $20 billion. And the PPP loan itself has about 250,000 applications for $350 billion. So the whole process is going to take some time as they try to ramp up, and they're trying to outsource some of this. All that stuff is being learned on the fly, because this is, obviously unprecedented, and they've never, you had the SBA Disaster Assistance Office had, a handful of full-time employees. And now you're talking about having to have hundreds or thousands of people trained to process all these applications. So there is a patience aspect that has to be, and it's very difficult for people right now because they're hurting and they need the money. But I'm not sitting here trying to defend SBA. I don't work for SBA, but I understand. If you put yourself in their shoes, they're dealing with something here they've never had to deal with either.
Certainly, it's unprecedented for all of us.
Yeah.
So, has anyone that you know of received funds from EIDL yet?
I have heard of people are starting to receive the $10,000 up to $10,000 advance, and also the initial disbursement of the loan, which is about $15,000. So that's the thing people need to understand. An EIDL loan can go up to $2 million, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to receive, if you applied for $2 million, that you're going to get $2 million. First of all, you don't know what you're going to get. They make that determination. But the disbursements, they come in disbursements on normally, not just in this case, disaster loan. Initial ones are starting to trickle in, as are the PPP loan money is starting to trickle in. I'm getting emails from clients. Guess what? I got my money. So it's slow, but it's starting to happen.
Okay. So the timeline on receiving those funds, any guess?
We don't have even a guess. From what we were seeing, it was, just to even hear about the approval. I was hearing people who were not approved were getting that pretty quickly. And the initial reports we were getting was that if you had lower than a 600 credit score, you were being denied the loan. Because again, this is a loan. So there was when they came out with the $10,000 advance, saying that even if feature, because so many people were applying that were not qualified to get a loan. So, what I've seen, it's, it was just the approval process was
Keith, your screen is locking up. I don't know if that's happening for more people or if that's just from my end. Okay, I'm getting some head nods. It looks like it's Keith's screen is locking up. Okay. Let's see. Can we get you back, Keith? Well, the joys of technology here, right? So as Keith works on that, and you may need, oh, it looks like maybe it's back.
Okay, I hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're having some problems maybe on your end, Keith.
I think so too.
Okay. Do you want to try to?
I hear you now.
Okay, you're good now? Okay. Yeah, you went out on my screen for a while, and I couldn't tell if it was my screen or everybody's, but seems that everyone was nodding, saying that you were kind of froze on everybody's screen. I think we left off with, again, just when could we be receiving those funds? But I think you kind of answered that, is that there's really no good answer, right, to that question. It's
yeah, like I said, 18 to 21 days is what, typically what we're reading. So
okay.
Even the contacts we have at SBA put the questions up to their higher ups, and that's the responses are varying. So there's again, SBA is scrambling, trying to figure this out as they go.
Okay. Is the let's see, I'm sorry. For our next question, you listed an email address earlier of who we could contact regarding questions about the SBA funding. Could you give us that email one more time?
Yeah, it's disaster customer assistance at sba.gov.
And again, the question that came in was, who can I contact with questions regarding SBA funding and programs? So as you can see, we have some people who are pretty well versed in these areas, but specific questions about your specific funding has to go directly to SBA.
Right. But if you have questions about, how to apply, what, the process, if you need help doing that, our SBDC would be happy to work with you to do that.
Okay, great. And they can reach you by going to scranton.edu.com. I'm sorry. Okay. I couldn't remember. ScrantonSBDC.com.
And on the once you hit the website, there's 3 buttons: starting a business, already in business, or education and training. If you click on the already in business tab, there's a request for consulting button that you just fill out the request for consulting, and you'll be assigned a counselor who will work with you to go through the process.
Great. Is there loan forgiveness for the EIDL program?
No, that the EIDL loan is a 3.75% loan that you can finance out to 30 years or amortize it out to 30 years. However, the portion, a percentage of the advance, the $10,000 up to $10,000 advance, can be forgiven if it's used on for payroll costs, similar to the PPP loan.
Okay.
Ethan, I think, is there a lower rate for nonprofits?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. The RSBDC normally doesn't work with nonprofits, so I kind of just kind of forgot that, but it's 2.75%, the loan for a nonprofit.
Thank you, Alex. And should I apply for both the Paycheck Protection Program and an EIDL loan?
We were advising people, to apply for both. However, in reality, you have to look at what this money, the Paycheck Protection Program is to just basically to protect your employees. to keep them off of unemployment, to keep them paid. It doesn't really benefit the business owner. You're still going to have bills that need to be paid, and that's where the economic injury loan comes into play. The economic, you can't get both. You can't double dip, but you can $10,000 advance, and that would be subtracted from anything that you received from the Paycheck Protection Program. And Alex and Neil, if I'm wrong on that, please correct me.
No, I believe that is correct. The $10,000 advance or whatever the advance turns out to be subtracted from the forgivable portion of PPP. And I know that borrowers who qualify for both just have to be careful to utilize it for different purposes.
And then I think that answered the question. So if I have applied for both and I'm approved for an EIDL and a PPP, what should I do?
That's where you really need to make the determination of what you need the money most for. And you know, again, if it's to keep your employees, then the PPP loan is probably the one you want to go with. If it's just to cover all of your operating expenses, you know, then I would go with the EIDL loan. But again, it is a loan. It's not going to be forgiven, and it's 3.75% over 30 years.
Is there, and this is our last question that I have here, and then we'll go to the questions in the chat. Is there a cap on the total amount of EIDL that I can receive?
We were told it is a $2 million, you know, it's a standard disaster loan is a $2 million, up to $2 million. So.
Okay. I am going to share my screen because we do have I do have a great slide that shows the one. So this shows the difference between the two programs, and I like that you could kind of compare and contrast. This is out on our Facebook page, but I will also share it when we share this recording. I'm going to take a look through these questions. Matt, if you could maybe help me to moderate some of these questions. Here's one. As a sole proprietor with only one employee, is my income counted for PPP?
I'll try to answer that with the guidance the research we've done with the sole proprietors is that your 2019 net profit capped at $100,000 maximum. If you have a 2019 tax return that's reported on your Schedule C, line 31, if you don't have a 2019 tax return completed yet, it will be on your 2019 income statement if you use QuickBooks or something like that.
In regard to PPP loan forgiveness regarding the PAUC expense, is the allowable amount to include in payroll expense the amount of the tax calculated on the wages paid within the 8-week time period, or if we receive the funds before April 30th, would we include the amount paid for the first quarter? I know it's a little bit loaded here. Sorry.
I can't see these questions.
Oh, I think they're just in the chat. Oh, that one was sent. You know, let me just copy and paste it back out.
Into the chat, yeah.
Yeah, and that was sent kind of privately to me, so some people are doing that, but I'll just, I just copied and pasted it, so it'll be the last question in there. And maybe a little specific, and we may need to follow up with that person directly. The question regarding sole proprietors with no employees. Yes, you can apply. And what tax forms do you look at then, Neil? what information is the bank looking for from sole proprietors?
We would be looking for much of the same information as I mentioned earlier, with the caveat that for a sole proprietor, we'd be looking for the Schedule C of your tax return or a QuickBooks profit and loss statement.
Okay. The question regarding, is the application for the advance of up to $10,000 different from the EIDL loan application? No, there was a checkbox on the EIDL loan application. Now that application did change. The EIDL application changed. Keith, do you remember the date of that change?
No, but it was towards the end of March. And again, this was triggered by a lot of people being denied when they originally applied for the EIDL loan because they didn't match the credit requirement. So they went and they fixed the application and they added a checkbox and it told people to reapply. And then this is where the problems came in. People who then went in and reapplied got their credit score run twice, which is hurting their credit. So that checkbox again was added, and I want to say around March 27th, but that's the day that the CARES Act passed. So I could be screwing up the date, but I think it was around the same time.
Okay.
It might have been earlier than that.
How would they know? Would their application number indicate that at all, or should they email SBDC?
SBDC is not going to be able to help them now because it's the application went to SBA, so it has to be through that SBA
okay.
email address.
Okay, great. The unforgiven portion of PPP, the loan rate on that, is it 1%?
It's 1%, not 0.5. 0.5 was what they originally came out with. I'm sorry, yeah, 1% is what they, or 5.5 is what they originally came out with, but that actually changed when people received the documentation. It was 1% for 2 years, but payments are deferred for 6 months. So realistically, you're going to have a loan. If it's not forgiven, you're going to have a loan that has to be paid off in 18 months.
Here is another question about the EIDL. If someone applied for an advance of $10,000 because the application was unclear that it was only $1,000 per employee, are they able to amend their application to be different, to be a different amount?
No, as far as I know that, and Neil, this is, a question you could answer probably, but I'm sorry, not Neil.
Alex.
This is the actual EIDL application. There's really nowhere to amend it. It's just a checkbox. So it's not like you could go in and change that. Right.
And the calculation of what you're receiving is strictly based off of your company's revenue, correct?
No, it's based on your employees for the advance.
For the advance, right.
So
but then the rest.
When you filled out the application and you put in your number of employees, that's what they're basing it on.
Right. All right. And then there's the question that I had copied and pasted. Were you able to review that one regarding the UC expense? Or should we follow up with that one directly? You could do that after.
Yeah, it's unclear as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how that'll be tested, and we'd have to deal with that probably on an individual basis.
Okay. Here is a good question, and Alex, this may be more something you can answer because it has to do with the employee retention credit. So there are many businesses that are still ordered to close. This particular question is a business that relies heavily on people gathering together. So instead of the PPP, they were thinking that they would wait and apply for the employee retention credit, because you can't do both the PPP loan and the employee retention credit. They're unsure that their business will be back to full capacity within 8 weeks. Can you advise on comparing the PPP and the employee retention credit?
Well, it's going to be a a calculation for each employer. I know there are different eligibility standards for the employee retention tax credit. If you're partially or fully suspended, if you've experienced a decline in revenue, I think by over 50% compared to the same time period last year, then you can qualify for a 50% tax credit for the first portion of compensation. I think it's $10,000. So, I think it's obviously difficult to make a general statement about comparing the two programs, and will have to be a individual companies crunching the numbers and deciding which makes the most sense for their for themselves.
And my understanding is it's 50%, the employee retention credit is 50% up to $10,000 of the wages. So it would be $5,000 on $10,000 of wages. That's what the credit is. I did read a lot about that program, and I'd be happy to discuss that in more detail. But again, I think it's probably a question that you really need to sit down again with your accountant and study and take a look at. And then finally, Neil, our last question here is regarding documentation with the PPP forgiveness. Is the bank going to be looking for QuickBook reports, check stubs? What documentation will they be looking at the end of this to determine forgiveness?
Sure. Yeah, I would recommend having both available. From what I've seen so far, it just says documentation verifying the number of FTEs and payroll, things like that. So it comes down to what the word documentation entail, and I think that's where the author of the question is going. So it would be best to have both available just in case. That would be my recommendation.
Great. Does anyone have any other questions while we have our experts on the phone today? I want to thank you all for taking the time to spend with us this morning. We went a little bit over our time that I had projected, but I think we had some great information shared and had some good conversation about these programs. If you have additional questions, please send them to me, and I will speak with our experts and try to get your questions answered and get those answers back to you as soon as possible. Stay tuned for our next installment of Restart, Rebound, Rebuild. We thank you all, and stay safe, stay well, and we'll talk soon. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.